Hello and welcome to Let's Talk. The Swiss federal elections are approaching in October. In the lead-up, we want to examine the major issues dominating the Swiss agenda: expensive healthcare, climate change, the war in Ukraine. Those are just some of the topics weighing on the minds of the Swiss population, both here and abroad. This is based on a survey carried out by gfs.bern Institute on behalf of the Swiss Broadcasting Corporation. We'll be breaking down those results in today's discussion. So with that, let's talk. As always, we're coming to you from the media studios of the Swiss Parliament right here in Bern. It's a fitting place for our conversation today on the state of Switzerland and its people. We'll be focusing on three very specific topics: state of mind, climate change, as well as Swiss identity. And joining me here is Lukas Golder, political scientist at gfs.bern, the institute that actually helped put together this survey. We also have, to my left, Michelle Huschmidt from Soli Swiss, a cooperative that helps Swiss people abroad. And for our special guest and Swiss expat, we have Kay Ruchti Crowley. She's joining us online. She's a retired software engineer and she's living between Ireland and Switzerland. Now let's start with the state of Switzerland, or the state of mind in Switzerland, as our very first topic. I have good news to share. The majority of the Swiss seem to be satisfied with their life to varying degrees. So Lukas, the first question to you is, what is this Swiss recipe for happiness? Can you break it down for us?
Yeah, I try to. I think there is no secret sauce. It's just the life here is good, and that means that the institution you can rely on, the security is here, the wealth is okay. There is even a healthcare and social care system, welfare system that works good. So these are elements that bring together a system that works good and that makes people satisfied. It's what you get from your country is also how you judge it.
It also seems that Switzerland seems to have a very good foundation of those basic services and needs. Now, Michelle, your organisation advises Swiss expats all around the world, but you yourself have also lived in the UK for many years, so I'd like to tap into that. Why don't you tell me your experience and what have you noticed from Swiss expats and their general life satisfaction?
According to our experience, Swiss people abroad actually are equally as satisfied as Swiss people who live at home. However, it's a very heterogeneous group, so it really depends where you live, where in the world. And if you can, wherever you go, if you have a Swiss passport, to a certain degree, you know that you can rely on the benefits of the amazing Swiss system. But your motivation to leave can be extremely diverse. You can be a student who only wants to be abroad for a couple of years. You can be a worker who is employed, who has a really intense job. You can be a pensioner who wants to retire and enjoy the sunshine. Or you can be a humanitarian aid worker. And your specific circumstances, your individual experience, will really reflect on your own happiness.
Lukas actually mentioned healthcare. Maybe you can say a few words about what you've seen in terms of Swiss living abroad and having access to the Swiss healthcare system still.
We notice at Soli Swiss that healthcare is really one of the important topics for Swiss people abroad. On the one hand, if you go to a country where you know that the healthcare is going to be one way or another inferior, you will be glad that you will try and still remain in the Swiss healthcare system, which is dependent on your domicile. If you go somewhere like I used to live in the UK, the NHS has its problems, but at the point of service, it is actually free, which means that you benefit. You are not concerned about high costs in healthcare in the same way that you are at the moment in Switzerland. So again, it really very much depends on the circumstances of the country.
Now, Lukas, in the survey, there is a distinction between private lives and professional lives, and people seem to be a little more dissatisfied when it comes to the latter. What could be the explanation for that?
Now, it's not an external factor that is really there somewhere and the economy goes up and down. It's enough work for most of us who are really looking for work. That's not the problem, but I think that the change of digitization speeded up really how we work and how fast we have to work. And a lot of people feel stressed. And there is even 17% in our study that say they had a burnout, they suffered from a burnout. And even a third thinks that there is a high risk in their environment, that there is a burnout for once. And this is also a clear sign that we have an extreme dense and speeded up level of work. And work is not a real satisfaction element. It's important for identity. Many people work a lot. It's 6 hours a day in average that people work each day. So it's important each day, but it doesn't help really to get more satisfied. It's too stressful.
So life at home is generally good, but at work we could see some improvements. So I'd like to bring up a graph on the screen now listing all the major concerns for the Swiss in the coming years. We can see here at the top we have healthcare, war and climate change. And then at the bottom, people are less concerned about future pandemics, the urban-rural divide, as well as unemployment. Lukas, just by seeing these results, how much of an impact do these issues really have on the everyday life and happiness of Swiss population?
I think there is a need to defend what we got. We are happy to what the system brings us to us. We are more or less satisfied with our lives, but we want to defend it, not only for this generation, but many people also think about the climate change of the next generation. So that's, I think, the situation at the moment. And we have crisis in the healthcare system, in the COVID pandemic. We have the war in the Ukraine, and these are elements that are new on this list, and they say also that we are strongly concerned about the situation in the whole world. So that's the element on the top. And on the bottom, the unemployment I already mentioned. In the 1990s, we had the first real crisis of unemployment after Second World War. And this was a shock for many people in my generation or my parents. They, in the first time, not has this growth narrative. It came to a stop what the success element of Switzerland were. And now this shock seems to be really away. We have the first period that the unemployment is not a top priority for the people anymore. But now it's the stress, as I mentioned. This is really a change also in, say, how people feel in Switzerland.
What I don't see on this list are things like people's own financial situation, as well as insufficient housing supply. Where do you think that they should belong? Do they have an impact on our everyday happiness?
Yeah, people mainly in the big cities that are looking desperately for new houses or apartments to rent, they have everyday really high problems, or even we think that the loans will raise, so we have problems to come. At the moment, it's not the main issue. Many people have a situation that is more or less stable, but this is a rising issue, and it's not in the top three, but it is a issue, for instance, for the next elections. So I think this will cause some worries as well.
Michelle, from your experience, what concerns from this list have been raised by the Swiss abroad?
From this particular list, I definitely say war and climate change. Again, the reason that I wouldn't cite healthcare immediately is that it's more a question of like what your country can provide to you. What is interesting for us is that we have an aid fund that if you come to us and you're a member and you say, I've encountered really substantial trouble, I need some help, we can support you. When this aid fund was set up, it was set up with the idea that you will be helped in the case of political turmoil. But now we have the case that people come to us and they're affected by climate change. It can be fire, it can be flood, it can be deforestation. And we have now actually adjusted the guidelines for when this aid is spoken, because the interaction between climate change and war makes it sometimes difficult to decide what's the factor that really caused the trouble to occur. But it's obvious that climate change is an important topic that is coming up for Swiss people abroad as well.
Now, Kay, you've been listening in so far. I'd love to get your thoughts on the situation. You've seen these results. Do you share the same opinion? Do you have the same concerns going forward?
Pretty much, I would say for me, probably top of the list. Well, healthcare is an issue, but the war particularly, because it has sort of spun into the second year now. Nobody expected it at all, and then least of all expected it to be so long. And it has had knock-on effects on things like interest rates and inflation. And for me, I have a new perspective being a retired person. So you kind of think about inflation, and your pension pot gets smaller. So they're concerns that I particularly have. And also extreme events are always an issue with climate change, of course. Yeah.
So from what I gather, your views seem to align with what we've seen
pretty much
from the survey.
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Let's actually move the discussion along to the second topic, and this is a good segue because we're going to focus on climate change. It's safe to say that it's one of the biggest issues that the Swiss are concerned about, and from the survey, about 69% of the Swiss population believe there is an immediate need for action on climate change. Lukas, what stands out to you from the findings from putting together this survey?
Now, when you look at the political picture, elections, votations as well, we have to stress that we have not only had a green wave after the last elections, we had 2 votations about how to cope with the climate change in Switzerland. And the first had a bit more price shield for everyone, and the second one was more investments from the state. And the second one won a majority, the first one not. So after this wave, we had a clear correction and also I really say more an accident for the climate idea and to intervene to cope with climate change. And the second votation showed that you can win a majority. They are the ideal, and the idea to have zero emissions is quite supported, but it has not to really interfere in the daily life and the daily routines that everybody loves. That's what I learned from the last 4 years. And we go in the next elections, and we expect the Green Party not to win anymore. Maybe they are the most, will lose most. And that is a sign that this motivation phase, this movement phase in the first phase with Me Too movement is now over. We are in a new phase, but it doesn't mean that the people, the majority of the Swiss people, would think that this is now overcome. We have no more problems. That is not the case, not at all.
It's interesting that you raise this point. Can you actually describe how these views on climate change as you move from the German-speaking region to the French-speaking region? And maybe it's also a little bit different in the Italian-speaking region.
Yeah, I can speak mainly about the situation in French-speaking part, because in the first decades I was politologue. It was rather less, say, awareness about the problems we face with pollution and also with the climate change than in German-speaking part. Now we observe in this study, this is over. We have the French-speaking world in Switzerland that is really keen now to move on, to interfere, to have state intervention, which is quite typical for the French-speaking part, that they are more relaxed when it comes to state intervention. And that's really a new element. I think the situation in traffic in Italian-speaking part, mainly in Tessin, is quite specific, and they suffer from traffic problems with a dense situation in every corner, and I think that turns a bit other perspectives, and now it has to be stressed for everybody, more or less, in Switzerland, that the private traffic to use your own car is very, very important. It's part of the identity. So this comes together again, that all 3 language regions want to have interventions to fight for against the climate change, but on the other hand, they also really many like their cars.
Michelle, what advice can you actually give to those on behalf of Solly Swiss expats living abroad who are concerned about climate change?
in general, we would say do the thing that you've already been doing in Switzerland, which is to get insurance. One has to say that generally, Swiss people who want to move abroad are very well prepared. They know what they're doing. They are well informed. And there is actually a lot of opportunity to choose insurance that is tailored to your specific needs. Switzerland is world leading in having insurance against all kinds of topics that maybe other countries don't have. So that is certainly something that they can do before they're there. And in general, people are very aware of the specific circumstances of the destination they go in. So keeping up to date and keeping abreast and relying also on your own opportunity to help yourself is certainly something that we encourage.
So the study analysed the potential solutions for climate change on an individual level, so for people like you and I. Let's take a look at this graphic on the screen now. And it's basically analysing what people are willing to forgo. You can see at the top, having an apartment above 20 degrees, not so much eating meat. So Lukas and Michelle, what are the Swiss willing to give up? What are your first thoughts when you see this?
They give up what they don't love too much or what is not part of their identity. And eating meat, who does it, who is part of experience, of daily life, of life quality, and you are not willing to give up, that's clear. On an individual level, routines and behaviors are very, very hard only to change. We all know that. And it's part of the identity. It's even, as I said, driving a car. The car is a symbol for many things that are linked to our growth, to our success stories. And that is not easy to change. And people are not willing to change. And they are looking for solutions from the state, from politics, to get along, but not to change too much. Because apartment or heating is not the same, and you don't feel like that is really touching my identity.
What do you think from the view of Swiss expats? What do you think they are less willing to give up from this list?
Even though we have apartment and oil and gas heating on the top, I'd like to zone in on the flying, because one of the things that is obvious is that if you live far away, flying becomes more than a luxury. It's a means to reconnect to your family and loved ones in Switzerland, if you have still some people that you know. My personal impression is that the apartment, you might think that you have some agency. Oh, I will put on another jumper. Oh, I will get double glazing. Oh, maybe we can have an opportunity to switch to renewable energy. Whereas with the flying, well, if you don't do it, your options how to create a life for yourself that is fulfilling is actually, even if you go beyond luxury travel or travel for pleasure, is actually much reduced. Maybe you'll have an opportunity to do remote work while you're on a boat somewhere, and your travel will change in the future. We will see that. But I think it does make sense to kind of bear in mind that for many people, it's also to do with agency and the opportunity to reconnect with Switzerland.
So actually, Kay, let's bring you up on the screen and back into the conversation now. I mean, how have your behaviours actually changed since living abroad? What are you doing in terms of being more environmentally friendly? Because as I understand, you live between Ireland and in Switzerland.
Mm-hmm. Well, several of the things on the list there, we don't heat our house higher than 20 degrees. We have grossly reduced how much meat we eat. Unfortunately, we have to fly every so often. We try to drive and take a ferry boat if it's the summer period, and if it's possible to stay, if we stay a long period of time. When we fly, we always carbon offset. The thing that is impossible to do in Ireland, unfortunately, is to not have a car and not have to drive everywhere, because public transport is really poor there. Everybody has a car. In fact, every household has a minimum of 2 cars, which is really a shame, but that's how it is there. Public transport is not fit for purpose in a lot of cases, especially if you live in a more rural area. So, but we have electric bikes, so we also try to minimize the amount we drive in that way.
It seems like you're still doing your part, even if you have to own a car. Lucas, back to you. On the political level, the majority of the Swiss are actually doubtful that Switzerland can do enough to combat climate change. So what other options, what other solutions are out there?
I think Swiss people are quite realistic. It's not Switzerland alone that can change it. And at the end, it's a responsibility of politics and not individual behavior as itself. So we have to have innovations, we have to support innovations, we have to collaborate with other countries. And this is realistic that the Swiss government alone cannot change. But on the other hand, I think the readiness to really also support such actions is higher than ever. So I think, yes, this is at the end often a responsibility to the system. And in this case, I think the climate change is a very complex fight and a very long fight to go through. And yeah, many people are ready to also to accept that.
And that's important. I think that at least the motivation is there for the next steps. So let's move on to the third and final part of our discussion, and this is all about Swiss identity. So to both of you, it's a very personal question, but what drives your Swiss identity? What makes you Swiss? Maybe you can start, Michelle.
I feel that I'm quite representative in my own personal experience in that I've become more Swiss when I was abroad, because you notice cultural differences, you notice your own quirks and habit. Classic. Punctuality is very important to me. I'm very conscientious. I tend to follow rules naturally, whereas when I was in the UK, I realized that that was not a given. That was not what everyone else did necessarily. And I think a lot of people actually realize once they're abroad, they go out very often seeking the new thing and go to a country not because they want to leave Switzerland, but because they want to explore a new world. And then eventually, after a couple of years, you start to realize, oh, this is where things fit really well with my own habits, and this is where I chafe. And then you start to think, well, maybe it would be nice to reconnect to some of my Swiss culture. It's not the same for everyone, but I think that's a common story.
So when you were living in the UK, did you occasionally crave a Sevelat, or did you also participate in the 1st of August celebrations as well?
After a couple of years, yes, I did crave my Sevelat. I did celebrate 1st of August, even though I did eat bratwurst on most of occasions. But I think it's telling that there is a committee for the celebration of the 1st of August in London, for example, where we did it, that it's close to the Swiss embassy, that people really have this need to come together and uphold a Swiss tradition. And I think becomes almost more important after you've been abroad for a while.
Lucas, what can you say? What makes you Swiss?
Yes, at the end I decided to analyze Swiss politics, and it's closely linked to direct democracy if we want to understand how our system works compared to other democracies. And I'm very, very attached to what brings our system, and that is a real clear parallelity to the people out there we asked in our survey. On the other hand, I think where I might be not very typical Swiss is where I think it measures about the solidarity we have with abroad. And I was from my army services, I was in Bosnia after the war in the 1990s, a long time ago. Still, the consequences of this war are very present there. But then I really wanted to share the idea of democracy with a country that wasn't very experienced with such form of responsibility. And this was an enormous, yes, also an experience for me personally. I think I stress more the solidarity, and to be, it is, yes, it's a good luck that you are born here in a stable system with a functional democracy. And we should maybe be a bit more aware of that.
So if we take a look at the survey from gfs.bern, what are the actual elements that make up the Swiss identity from the broader population? And if we can actually take a look at that graph on the screen now, maybe you can run through some of those. We've got respect for laws, as well as speaking national language. What can you say?
Yes, the respect for laws is an important element, also a bit surprising, but in the heart of this idea is that we believe that people tend to follow the rules, and this makes security. This is the definition of security at the end, the security that the things run as we want it in the democracy. And I think that's a good result, an interesting result as well. The national language is an identity factor because we have these 4 languages and we're proud of it. And we have this exchange, and we are also, when it comes to peace or war, we have this element that it brings peace and protection of minorities, languages, cultures, religions. This is a really peace, heart of peace, if you want, Switzerland as well. And I think that is also a bit a sign of that. And the nature and what we have here, also with the mountains, etc., is also clearly identifying, and is also not only for us, also for tourists from abroad. So, and these are quite good elements that bring together some form of identity.
And what can you say about those at the bottom? Having a birthplace in Switzerland or being able to speak a dialect, that is not so important to make up the Swiss identity.
Yeah, the bottom one, the religion is also very interesting, I think, to also a bit have this change of our society. That would be another result 20 years or 40 years ago. Religion was one of the identifying factors, but now we have much more individualization, and we know or accepted that the individualization brought also many people with other perspectives from abroad, and the birthplace in Switzerland is not the most important thing, as we know from football, for instance. And the dialect is something, I think, that is more identifying in a German-speaking part, while as the other regions, they formulate their identity more about their common language.
What we don't see on this list is, in fact, direct democracy, and the majority of the Swiss believe that it is of essential value. So just walk us through, why do you think the Swiss have such a strong attachment to direct democracy?
I completely understand this result, and I follow it 100%. That also with 20 years of experience as a political scientist, I would say this is the unique element that drives identity of Switzerland. Direct democracy means, for instance, in a crisis, that we are the only country in the world that voted 3 times about the COVID laws. So when we decide to reduce the freedom, we decided together. The majority decided, and everybody accepted. And it's not to have one referendum in 4 years and then elections. It's all of the time, every year we vote. And this systematic form makes that the majority is not always the same. Once this majority wins, and another time another majority. And the process is very accepted. And this process that we can vote, you can bring in with a popular initiative a new idea, or you can stop what the government wants with a referendum against a law. These both elements, they function extremely well in Switzerland, and I think that this is the core of Swiss identity.
Let's take a look abroad now. Michelle, what do you think of those values is still important to the Swiss even when they move abroad? Does it look a little bit different?
No, I wouldn't say so. I would say it's the very same things that are important for Swiss people abroad. I would absolutely echo your point about direct democracy. I think, actually, I lived in the UK for a long time, and you saw it there. When you have a referendum and you can vote 4 times a year, your opinion that is being voiced actually acts as a pressure valve, and you can really express how you feel about the politics. I feel, or I personally suspect, that didn't happen in the UK. So when the Brexit referendum came round, it was the first time that people could express their opinion in this particular kind of format, and then it was expressed. With some people, I personally had the impression, talking to British people and Swiss people in the UK at the time, kind of like trying to express general frustration without really thinking about the future ahead. So when you think about like direct democracy, I think a lot of Swiss people abroad are extremely grateful for the opportunity to vote. We know from the Swiss Council abroad that e-voting, the opportunity to give you a vote in a timely manner, even though you might live in Singapore or Australia, far away, is so central to people and is such a thread that binds people to Switzerland that I think direct democracy must be at the core of Swiss identity.
And just finally, as part of Solly Swiss, the organisation that you're working for, what are some ways that you would advise the Swiss to re-engage with their home country for those who have been living abroad for a while?
There's really a big difference between those people who want to temporarily live abroad or those people who know with certainty that they will leave Switzerland forever. And maybe it's always good to have a backdoor just in case, because you never know what life throws at you. For those people who go abroad temporarily, there's a lot of questions about how can I prepare for old age? How can I prepare with my AHV, my pension scheme? How can I prevent illness? How can I insure against all these different types? So I think a lot of it, how Swiss people re-engage when they're abroad, is that they make up their minds in what do I need in the future and how can I contribute to these future needs now? And so we always talk to people about what are the consequences of your choices now. For example, if you want to have a pension abroad, you will still be glad if it's a good pension. So you might want to pay in continuously, and there are certain factors that decide how you can do that or not, whether you live in an EU country, whether not, how you're employed. And so gather information now and thinking ahead is always a good thing. So that's the main thing we recommend.
And Kay, we have covered quite some number of topics in this half an hour alone. Maybe just to wrap up, what have you taken out of this discussion? What has stood out to you?
I think the tips from Michelle have been really enlightening for me. Her advice to people living abroad, and also the survey from Lukas, his interpretation of all the data. And I'd like to add for the Swissness, because I wasn't born here, I only became Swiss through marriage in my 20s. But the real thing that sticks out for me and that I embrace in being Swiss is the direct democracy and the way the Swiss people, their empathy for the greater good, the way they vote. They will not vote always to their own advantage, but they'll vote to what is better for society in general. And I think that is so unique and it is so wonderful, because you do not see that in other countries. Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's great that you've managed to get fresh insights from this discussion. That's what we were really aiming for. So that brings us to the end of this episode of Let's Talk. A big thank you to our guests for breaking down these complex but very relevant topics. Make sure to continue the discussion by heading over to swissinfo.ch. You can read the report on this study, plus on our Swiss Info app. We'll see you very soon, and take care and goodbye.